Elon has invited me today to your class to talk a little bit about what I do and some of the concerns that are raised by my job. I work for the Brookline Public Health Department. I worked in this field for about 15 years, and it gets a little discouraging because, I mean, you're dealing with some pretty serious problems, and you think, geez, it would be really nice if there was a way to kind of just prevent some of this stuff from happening to begin with, rather than just dealing with the problem after the fact. I mean, dealing with, you know, a 32-year-old heroin addict woman who's already lost 3 children to DSS, who's trying to hold on to her 4th child, who's having withdrawal symptoms. I mean, you wish you could have done something when this person was like 14 or 15 to prevent this whole, you know, sort of terrible the next 15 years of her life. That's when I was trained in social work, social services, and not in public health. And then I started to think about, geez, prevention would be really nice. And I learned a lot about public health, which is a very different approach than psychology or social work. And it's really much more about trying to prevent these issues from actually happening. A couple of public health approaches. One is around tobacco. There have been a huge push around public education around tobacco. When I was growing up, there were advertisements on TV with doctors, like, you know, practically saying tobacco was good for you. I mean, you know, no one was educated about how harmful tobacco is. And now, you guys probably, you know, how old were you when you first learned that tobacco was bad for you, Adam?
Probably 6 or 7.
Yeah, and so you guys have got, I bet very few of you in this room smoke cigarettes and other respiratory illnesses coming from it. So that's really kind of a public health approach. I mean, another one that's been talked about recently is gun control. Obviously, gun violence is a huge health problem, right? People get shot. You know, look at Gabby Giffords, right? So the idea of preventing people from actually having guns is a public health approach to reducing gun violence. I have given you sort of the most recent survey, which tracks it just back to 2005. Because I really can't fit that much on one page across. So we do this survey, and this is really helpful because it tells us some of the significant health issues that we need to address as a community in Brookline. It starts with alcohol use, marijuana use, other illegal drug use, tobacco, violence-related behavior, suicidal behavior, sexual behavior. There were a couple other things that I wanted to bring up that I felt concerning about when I looked at some of the data. And some of it's actually not in here, but one of the things that somebody mentioned is the binge drinking going down, which I think is good. It's dropped down from 24 to 21%, but we still have, we had a student in January who was taken to the emergency room with an alcohol overdose and was told 10 minutes later he would be dead. And you know, there was no action taken, you know, sooner to get the student to the emergency room. Since I have been here, we have lost 4 students to drunk driving accidents, and another student who had graduated, was out of high school for a year, who was driving and killed his girlfriend in a car accident. We've had students involved in some pretty serious fights involving alcohol abuse. So I think it's great that that has trended down, but it's still sort of the #1 cause of accidents. And let's talk about marijuana. So marijuana has been decriminalized, and the perception that marijuana is harmless has gone up. Or, you know, they're not going to get in trouble legally about it anymore. If it's medicinal, you know, marijuana, then it must be okay to use. So there really is just kind of an increased perception that there's really no problem with smoking marijuana. And yet, clearly, our data shows that there are 10% of our students who smoke marijuana go on to become really heavy marijuana smokers, and it really interferes with their academics. And so what Teddy Jacobs has done in freshman health curriculum is to actually introduce some new lesson plans around marijuana that were designed by the peer leaders to really, from a perspective of, like, what is actually going to be meaningful to freshmen? I mean, do they care that, you know, they could get a ticket? No. what would be meaningful to freshmen to think about why do I not want to smoke marijuana? So a bunch of students got together, created 2 lesson plans that after interviewing a bunch of freshmen and thinking about getting, we call it focus groups, where you sit down and ask a bunch of questions and get their feedback like you would do around stress. You'd sit down with a group of students and you'd say, okay, I want to know what are the sources of stress, and you'd get kind of data from different groups. So Teddy implemented these new, and she's just doing that this spring as a way to really try to view it as a health risk behavior, not because nobody who smokes marijuana does it because they're a bad person. I mean, it has nothing to do with a moral issue, good or bad. It really has to do with taking care of your health. We thought cigarettes were fine, that they increased your concentration. I have students coming in now saying, yes, I smoke marijuana, it increases my concentration. There's been so much research that's been done on the negative effects of cigarettes, and I think with marijuana that we need to really look at it as a public health issue and not so much as a legal good-bad thing, which when it gets into that category, it's sort of useless. 10% of our students smoke marijuana heavily, and 40% have tried marijuana. So that means 1 in 4 who have tried marijuana go on to become heavy marijuana smokers in a way that interferes with their academics, their performance, their future, their grades, their social life. So, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
When you say it interferes with their academics and like education and stuff like that, are you like, you didn't say negative response, but do you mean it interferes in a negative?
Yeah. If you correlate this with grades, for instance, if we cross-reference, one of the questions, what are your grades? We cross-referenced it with marijuana, and in fact, we couldn't publish the data on that because it was so significant that it would identify people who were smoking marijuana. Tell me why condom use has gone down. Are people any less concerned about sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy? So that's under sexual behaviors. Condom use, usually use a condom, was 83% 2005, 82, 78, and 74. So even though it only went down 4%, and it's trending down. It's like, I mean, you guys have all took freshman health. I don't like to go to a Teddy Jacobs when they talk about all the sexually transmitted infections at class. It's like, ugh. So this is another one. You probably all know about synthetic marijuana. And so synthetic marijuana is Spice, K2, Scooby, let me know the rest of the sentence, Scooby, snacks, thank you, so it's, if you do research about synthetic marijuana, it's very accessible. I mean, you can walk down to some little corner shop and buy Scooby snacks, right? It's a potpourri or an incense that you can smoke that is, people smoke it to get high because it's easy. It's easy. You can go buy it at a store versus marijuana, which you cannot buy at a store yet, right? There are huge health risks about it. There were students outside in the smoking area smoking Scooby snacks, right? But I think there's a lack of education about how dangerous it can be. I think it's something that we haven't done anything about at this point, and there's a huge need to do something about it because I think it's becoming. Raise your hand if you've heard about some of these products. Okay, raise your hand if you've heard about how harmful they can be. Just, yeah, some. Okay, so I think it's something that it would be really helpful if there was something looked at around the issue of synthetic marijuana. I mean, I think as much as we think we are a totally gay-friendly community in Brookline, there is still a huge amount to be done. I mean, I know when my son came out, I mean, he didn't come out until he was 18 in high school, senior year of high school, and just felt like if he had been able to come out his freshman year, it would have been so much better for him. But he just felt, and as you were mentioning, who was it, seniors versus freshmen, the difference, but when you're a freshman, to feel like you're in that kind of culture is really difficult. So I think that would be something that if seniors did something targeted to freshmen, that would be really effective. I think one of the, I think that with the peer leaders, there's 2 parts to that. One is really their goal is to raise the age of onset. So they're targeting younger students because the earlier you start using, the more likely you are to really go on to have problems with addiction and abuse. So if you don't start using until you're after 16, you have a much lower rate of addiction and problems. And 18 is even much lower. So that's kind of the goal. But if you're a peer leader and you're talking to 8th graders, so we're asking the peer leaders themselves not to use. Not that they're saying that you, not you personally, but that you shouldn't use. But they can't go and talk to 8th graders and talk about why they should, delay onset of use if they're also being seen at parties drunk. Right? So that's really, so there's sort of 2 parts to that. I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk to you all today. And that if you have more questions, I'm in Run 49.